Kirsty, I've been reading your book at the moment, A Portable Shelter, which seems a bit to be based in folklore and in Scottish folklore and folk tales and that kind of thing. I wonder if you could talk a bit about your use of legends in the book and how the book came to be come about.
Thank you, yeah. It's weird, my first reaction when someone says I'm reading a book, I go, oh no, like you're reading my diary, like I put it out there, it's really stupid. Yeah, so A Portable Shelter is my third book, and it's a short story collection. And it came about through a fellowship that I got a couple of years ago, and it was the Gavin Wallace Fellowship. And Gavin Wallace was a guy who worked in the literature literature community in Scotland. He was just a really good guy. He worked for Creative Scotland, which is the arts council in Scotland, and he did so much to support up-and-coming writers and established writers as well. And he died really suddenly, and it was really personal for me because I worked temporarily for Creative Scotland, so he was my boss for a while, and he wrote me some references for various retreats and fellowships and things, other ones that I applied for. So he was really supportive of me when I was just starting out. And he died about a year after my dad died, and they died in really similar circumstances. They both died very young, in their 50s, very suddenly before their time, but they were both quite troubled as well. They were both alcoholics and had split up with their wives and were kind of struggling with various aspects of life. So although I missed Gavin, just to miss him as a human, I also really felt for his sons, because his sons were even younger than I was when my dad died, so it kind of brought up a lot of the feelings that I'd had after losing my dad as well. So it was a real honour to be able to write this book based on the backs of these two men who had such huge influence on me, obviously in very different ways. So I really wanted to write a book that was about grief and loss and growing up and the lessons that we learn from various people throughout our lives. So the structure of the book, it's linked short stories, and I always loved those books when I was a kid. I always loved children's horror stories, and I still do, that are linked in some way. Normally it's like friends around a campfire or at a sleepover, and they're all telling each other these stories, and I always loved those. So I wanted to do something similar. So the frame story of the book is two women who are expecting their first child together are telling stories to this unborn baby. And the one who's carrying the baby tells the stories when her partner is out at work, and then the other one tells the stories when her partner is asleep. And each of them is trying to pass on what they've learned in their lives, so various stories that people have told them that they're then passing on, which does sound very sweet. They're quite dark, and actually my top tip is, if you're planning to publish a book and you haven't published it yet, is don't ever read your reviews, which I've only learned recently not to do. It's that way madness lies. It's a terrible thing to do. One of the reviews for this book was saying, it doesn't seem like these women want this baby to be born. Why are they telling me all these terrible stories? And so some of the stories are quite dark. But I felt like that was accurate. I don't think, for me anyway, I can't take any real comfort in a story that's too cutesy or too sweet. I think it's only when we go to dark places and then come back from those dark places that we can really get any comfort. So that's why I decided to make the stories quite dark in places, but hopefully overall the collection is a positive message that even when things do get dark, or even when things do look horrible, we can come back from that. So that was my thought behind the book. And it was published by a tiny little press. Literally, it's one guy in Glasgow publishes these books, which is part of the fellowship, was that he was going to publish the book. And it was limited to 1,000 copies, and they've nearly all gone now, I think. There's maybe a couple kicking about in bookshops in various places, but they've nearly all gone. But my publisher who published my novel, which I've got a couple of copies if you're interested in it on the table, they will be doing a paperback next year. So that version's really nice though. They did all these lovely custom woodblock illustrations and everything. It's a very pretty looking book. But yeah, that's what that book came about.
Yes. No, I've got a question for you as well.
Oh, was it? Sorry.
Yes, my question is not about Kirsty's book, though. You probably are most well known for your flash fiction, and as a flash fiction writer, I would say, and you seem to be quite prolific, and you seem to have a real affinity with it as a form. So I wonder if you could talk a bit about your love for flash fiction and what appeals to you in a piece of flash fiction.
Goodness, how long have we got? The problem is I write very short pieces, but I can talk about this kind of thing for ages. So I think that my love for flash fiction, for very short stories, came about through having been a journalist, and I was trained as a journalist many years ago.
How many lives have you had?
I know. I was a science journalist, but I did a one-year sort of postgraduate journalism diploma after the physics degree that didn't go very well. And we were trained in the art of brevity, basically. They really trained you in compression. And we came to understand how it's actually much easier to write a longer piece than it is to write these tiny, tiny short pieces and try and get in as much as possible. So I think that's where it started. Or I'm pretending that's where it started because I don't really know. But it really flourished for me after my first short story collection came out in 2008, The White Rose and Other Stories. And it's got half what you might call regular length short stories, which are all inspired by a new scientist. And then half very tiny short stories, which I just sort of started writing then. And didn't really know what flash fiction was, but kind of liked it. And when I was waiting, after I got the book deal, in 2007, it was 15 months till the book came out, and I felt like I was holding my breath for 15 months, and that they were going to call me, I don't know if this happened with you as well, going to say that it was been a terrible mistake, it was another Tania, and it wasn't you, and it's 15 months, and so I couldn't really focus, I couldn't keep much in my head. All I could do was write flash fiction, which you can sort of write, I with a lot of practice, and I've written hundreds, you can write it in one session, you can get a first draft down really quickly. And I was a member of quite a few online writing groups for specifically flash fiction. And what's wonderful about them, and I highly recommend them, is they would often set weekly challenges where they would say something like, write a story in under 500 words in which someone dies in the first line. And that kind of thing just unleashes me. I loved it. So I wrote so much in that year and a half. And I think it's a wonderful thing. It's completely different from the way I write short stories, and different again from how I write poetry. But what's great for me about flash fiction is you can use up so many ideas. Because I have ideas constantly. I think you find, it's like creative is like a muscle. The more you use it, it's just going on. And I spend a lot of time trying to distract myself from having more ideas. So you can use up a lot of them. And also, you get less precious about each story. Because if you've written 3 or 4 in sort of a week, and one you like, you can just get rid of the other 3 and think, well, I can do this again next week, which isn't to say that they're easy and that it's easy to write a good, it's not easy to write a good anything really, and I think this whole Malcolm Gladwell 10,000 hours thing is quite true, that you need to put in the time. But I wrote that, I don't know, the first thing I wrote, the Black Friday thing that I read to you, I think it's on the borderline of flash fiction and prose poem. I have no idea where that boundary is, but I wrote it really quickly. But I think I like to say that it took 15 years plus that half hour to write. Because people don't like it if you say, oh, I wrote that in half an hour, but I think it takes a long time to practice to be able to write something quickly. But I really love it, and I run lots of workshops in writing flash fiction, and I see how it releases people, because if they've never written before but they've always wanted to write, they think they have to start with a novel. And that's so daunting, obviously. So when you say to them, no, you can start with these tiny things, and often they've written some small things and thought, these are just fragments, these aren't worth anything. And so they find that, yes, they might be, you can do it. Size isn't everything. I'll stop there, I've got to talk for ages.
Nice. I wondered, sorry, go on.
You go.
All right then, I wondered what you think about writers' groups, because obviously you've mentioned that both of you, you've got a practice going, but do you still involve yourself in writers' groups, and how do you find the concept of having a group of writers who meet sort of on a weekly basis?
Yeah, no, I love it. I'm in a writers group, but it's just 3 of us, but we've been going for years now, actual years. So it's me and 2 other young female Glasgow writers. I'm sure, if we all have books out at the same time, we'll be like pitched all together to do events and things. And it's been really amazing. And it's what I found really interesting over the years is, if we were all doing Mario Kart or something, there's times when one of us has gone ahead and the other one's pulled back. So when we started, I was way at the back. So Katie, one of the other writers, she was doing so well. She'd written 2 novels, and she got an agent for them, and the agent hadn't managed to sell them, but she'd written them and she was writing a 3rd one, so she was like the superstar, and I was a total beginner. And then Helen, the other writer, she was a bit ahead of me as well because she had agent interest and she had a novel draft and I had nothing. And I just had like a bunch of stories. They weren't in a collection or anything. And then it's funny, over the years, you know, at a certain point some of us have pulled ahead. So like right now I've got the most books out. So Helen's first book's coming out next year and I've got 3 out. And Katie's just had a baby, so she's had to kind of pull back a little bit. And it's been really interesting, and it's just really shown me how much a game of chance it is. You know, I'm not a better writer than them. It's just I got lucky with getting the publication deals, and you know, I've read their stuff. It's incredible, and it will be published. It's just a matter of time. But it's just really shown me this is a massive dollop of luck, and timing is so much a part of publication. But I totally value their feedback so much. We're all really different writers in terms of style, but we're all very ambitious, which I find very inspiring because they keep pushing me to keep working, keep trying, never kind of get disillusioned or disheartened or anything. And I never let anything go out into the world until they've seen it, because they kind of know me and know my style, and quite often what I do is I know what I'm trying to say, but I haven't actually managed to say it. So then they'll say, what's this story about? Which of course completely flummoxes me, and then I think, I don't know, I just made up some stuff. I don't know. But it's really valuable, and I think you need fresh eyes on your work, absolutely. I always get to a point where I think I've finished a story, and it's not finished. Of course it isn't. I've just gone as far as I can with it, and at that point you need someone else to take over. So by the time I put anything out in the world, it's been through I obviously edit everything myself. I read everything to my partner, so it gets an edit after I've read it to her. It goes through my workshop group, so I edit it then. It goes past my agent, so I do an edit for her, and then it goes past my editor, and I do at least 2 edits for her as well. So they're like the first real line of defense against me and shitness. It's really valuable. No, I could not do without my workshop group, absolutely.
I like that line of defence against shit.
Left to my own devices, I would be incredibly shit. You need people to help you.
So true, it's so true. The writing groups I talked about, the online writing groups, were invaluable to me, and I was also partly, for me it was all online for a long time because I was living abroad, I was living in Israel, and so I had no one, I didn't really have anyone near me, so the online world became it for me, and it was fantastic. It really changed my life. I then had a face-to-face writing group in Jerusalem, which was great, even though we were all writing completely different things. And I haven't been a member of a writing group for years. I don't feel the need right now. I think there's things I've needed to do on my own to explore and not want to have other people's input. I am doing a PhD right now in creative writing, and this is my final year, and I haven't wanted to really show my work to anyone. I don't know. I think there will come a point with the poems. I've signed up for a poetry class next year. I think I really need that. And if I could find a writing workshop group like Kirsty's, that sounds lovely. I haven't got it at the moment, but I will pass on a cautionary tale in terms of groups. I did an MA in creative writing 11 or 12 years ago at Bath Spa University, and I gave a short story into my workshop group to be critiqued, and they all hated it. They all said, this just won't work. I'd made up some science basically at the end, which I really needed for the story, and they said, no, this just won't, you can't have this. And somehow I knew, even though I was really a beginner at that point, I knew they were all wrong. And you know what, that was my breakthrough story. That story got picked up by a production company who broadcast it on Radio 4, and that was where everything started, with that story that I didn't change. And that was The White Robe, which became the title story of my book. And that taught me the lesson very early on that writing is not a democracy. And it is possible that the entirety of your group is wrong. Somehow you'll know. Because I think that's a fine line with groups. If you've been together years and you trust each other, that's one thing. But sometimes either people are very eager to adopt all the suggestions of their group, or not to take on any suggestions at all. So I think it's a fine line of finding people you trust, whether they're face-to-face or online. But if you found them, that's a wonderful thing.
Yeah, I do sometimes ignore things that they say. Politely, like they give feedback and I say, thank you, that was wonderful, let me top up your glass. And then quietly just ignore everything.
There was a question at the back.
Oh yeah, you've both written books in like different forms. So Tania, like long short fiction, short fiction, poetry, and you write novels and short stories. I wonder if you could talk a bit more about the difference between writing in those two different forms, but also publishing them, and or sort of getting reactions to them, because I feel like there's a very different sort of reaction, if you say, in a novel, to say short stories. And again, I've not written poetry, but I imagine for poetry, because short stories and poetry seem more sort of niche, and there's like a group of people who are really into them, and then most people don't read them or really know about them.
Miko. Well, actually, it's a really interesting question. I haven't published the poetry chapbook yet. That's coming out in February. Fairly terrified. I've used the word terrified several times tonight. I'm terrified of poets en masse, really. I'm getting a lot better with one-on-one with poets, but it really is a completely different world from the short story world. It's a shame that it's so separate, and I was thinking tonight, it's so lovely that poetry is automatically a part of an event called Fictions of Every Kind, but I don't think you'd find that at a poetry event. I suspect I might be denigrating, and if this is being filmed. But I think it's a shame, because I think we have so much in common, poetry and short stories especially, in terms of density and compression. But I have no idea what's going to happen when my poetry chapbook comes out. It won second prize in a poetry chapbook competition, which was amazing validation, because I was really still at the point of like, I don't know if these are poems, so someone thinks they're poems. But in terms of reviews, I don't know if I'm going to read them. I don't know what to do about that. I don't know. What do I don't know.
Try not to read them. I say that you will, like when you get a book out, you will read the reviews, but I'm just saying try so hard not to, because it's not helpful.
I did. I've always read the reviews of the other books. Well,
maybe yours are wonderful.
Well, even the negative ones, or the ones I think I've learned something from. There is a tendency though, you read them and they're telling you what they think you're doing, and then you think, am I doing that? And if it's working, maybe I should carry on doing it. And you sort of have to let go of that. But as a short story writer, you're kind of grateful if anybody is reading your book of short stories, frankly, and if they take the time to engage with your book enough to write a review. The very first review of my first book, I think the reviewer, I didn't know her, and she might have thought that I might not have been happy with that review, because, well, frankly, it was balanced. There were negative bits and positive bits, and I was so happy that a stranger who wasn't my mother had read the book and responded. So I've been really lucky to get responses to it. It's fairly miraculous. And the second book got a review in the Times Literary Supplement, but frankly, I don't really know if he liked it or not. I couldn't tell. He seemed to be talking more about himself. And it was fantastic. Were you asking about our writing processes of the different things as well? Well, no, for me, it's a completely different process. For prose or fiction, well, I count the prose poem, whatever that is, I have to have my fingers moving, either with a pen or keyboard. But poetry, I write out loud, which is a very strange thing, and I don't really know how it's happened. More people nodding, it's very good. I write it a lot in the bath, actually, because I've got away from the internet, and it comes out loud. And because I've written it out loud, if it works, I automatically have it memorised, strangely. So it seems to be more of a full body experience for me. And as I mentioned, it's allowed me to look directly at things that are happening in my own life without having to mediate through fictional characters. And I love it because it's given me a way to document just what happens on a daily basis. I've written a lot of poems, most of which no one will ever see, but I've got them as kind of record of stuff that I've seen, and that I can let go a bit of that need for narrative and just observe in some ways as well, although some of the poems are also little stories. So totally different process. Love the line break. I haven't written that many short stories recently because I co-wrote a book on writing short stories about 1.5 years ago, and nothing will block you more than having to write about your own writing process. So it was wonderful. I learned a lot from it, and I miss fictional characters. We were talking about that today, so I'd like to get back to it. But there's, beauties and benefits to both, and who knows what will happen in the future.
Yeah, I love short stories and novels, and I'm hoping, I'm so early on in my career, so who knows, but my plan is to always alternate. So I've just published a short story collection, and I'm writing a novel now, and then it'll be stories, and then a novel, and so on and so on. Which, you're asking about how they're received. My agent and editor are less pleased about. They like novels because they sell better. But I love both equally, and I couldn't just write one or the other. To me, they appeal to different parts of my brain. And I'm the same as a reader. Sometimes as a reader, I just want this real, little punch of story that's just so perfect and beautiful, this little glittering gem of perfect story. and then that's it, and that's all that there is, and I can sit and daydream about it and kind of fill in the edges a little bit myself. But then sometimes I want to just read a novel and, you know, be so immersed in this other world and really go on a journey and get to know the characters and see them change. So it's the same for me as a writer. Sometimes I want to just have this little punch of story, and sometimes I just want to go on this big journey and, you know, spend a year in this landscape that I've created with these people that I've made up. So yeah, I think I'll always like both. They are received quite differently, and I have to say at this point, the biggest difference is you can make a living from novels. I don't think you can make a living, I couldn't make a living from short stories anyway. It's really tough. But from novels, like, you can make a living on that, which is a real big difference. However, I've noticed my short stories win prizes and my novels don't win prizes. Or my one novel that I have so far. I don't know why that is, because it's the same writing. It's the same stories, just longer or shorter. But I think that's interesting, and I wonder whether I don't know what the difference is, but I've just noticed that difference. My novel is less kind of critically acclaimed, whereas the short stories seem to do well with prizes, but then the novel has more readers, but it's less kind of critically acclaimed. I don't know why that is.
On that note, actually, a few more things I want to say. Something else we were talking about just before the event is I realised through the writing of part of the book on writing short stories, where the history of the short story is seen as a marginalised form. And actually that can be very liberating, because if no one's really looking at what you're doing, you can kind of do anything you want. So now I'm trying to see, after many years of tearing my hair out, trying to get an agent, etc., I'm like, I'm liberated. I can do whatever I want because no one's really watching me, and I'm somewhere on the fringes. Poetry, I think, is a bit more watched than short stories in this country anyway. There's sort of more kudos, even if there's not more financial reward associated with it. And another interesting thing, what you just said as well, in terms of response, maybe as depends on what genre you're seen as. My first book was reviewed by a guy on his blog, and he said something about the flash fictions. He said, I didn't really get them, but if she called them poems, I would have liked them a lot more. That's really strange. And I don't think it really matters what you call anything. Anyway? No, people want to assign labels to things, and right now, for my PhD, I'm working on a hybrid cross-genre book of poetry, prose and things, and who knows how it will be received or if I'll finish it. But I really am not into labels and genres and that kind of thing, but it's other people who slap them on.
I feel like I almost cheated with my novel as well. It's very much like a short story writer's novel. Short story form suits me, suits my way of thinking a lot better, and the novel's written, there are two main characters, and we repeatedly return to them, but all the other characters in the book get their own chapter to kind of advance the story, so we get to see the same world from lots and lots of different perspectives. And to me, that was a lot easier as a short story writer, because I was essentially writing a whole series of little stories from different characters' perspectives.
Can we hear some more of your cheese jokes?
Okay. Has anyone ever said that to you before, Kirsty?
All the time.
I'm sorry.
You can have, okay, here's one, and then I promise I won't inflict any more. Did you hear about the explosion at the cheese factory? All that was left was debris. Right, no more, I promise.
Well, thank you very much, Kirsty and Tania.